Was the Pope appealing for peace, or was he praying for peace?
And the same applies to the Caribbean drag.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what do you have to say about that, guys? Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Views on the News. And as you can see, we have our old friends, our respected old friends. I don't know the word old, do you? I mean, how can we get away from that? Senior panelists from the various parts of the world. We have Guy Otten from Manchester area of England. We have DP Higgs, Minister Roney, from representing the Pastafarians from British Columbia, quite northern part of British Columbia, I believe, right now.
That's correct.
And we have Dr. Ty Wells from Tennessee, who is starring. Yeah, he's starring in a commercial for his company, and it's really good. I recommend you take a look at that.
Thank you.
Anyway, here we go with the first item of news. You won't be surprised about this because we've covered it before. We know that the Iranian president, Ebrahim Raisi, is cuddling up to Russian President Vladimir Putin and supporting him over the invasion of Ukraine and such like activities. So they've had a phone call, and the president of Iran expressed his full support for the Russian leadership against the Wagner Rebellion. So, as I said, you won't be surprised about that. But you got anything to say about it?
Always a good
I mean, what we've got is two dictatorial regimes, and they're both pariahs internationally. So it makes sense for each of them to cuddle up and support each other, in the context of being rejected by pretty much a large number of other nations. There's quite a few that are trying to be neutral, which is not helpful, but there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
It's an example of what I call tyrannophilia, where tyrants indulge themselves in other tyrants.
Right.
Tyrannophilia.
The image, that's the most important thing, right? And you just want to make sure that your brand is on point.
I mean, the Wagner Rebellion is interesting. I mean, it seems to have gone off somewhat at half cock, as it were. But it does reveal that some of the problems maybe within the Russian Federation, and they do seem to be relying a lot on private armies. It's not the only private army. It seems extraordinary that a tyrant, a dictator, should have any private armies. It's really contrary to principle from their point of view.
Well, there you go. Money will buy mercenaries. The strange thing is, though, this isn't really of religious connection, but the strange thing is that the Wagner Group are now supposedly in Belarus and are recruiting. So I don't know who's paying them now. They've upset Putin, but there you go. Anyway,
well, I think the reality is that the Wagner Group are engaged in a number of mercenary wars in Africa. So presumably the Africans are paying for them. I don't know who's paying.
Maybe. They were also involved in Syria, weren't they? Yeah. So they have multiple masters, I suppose, is a way of describing that. Right, okay. Let's leave that mess and move on to another one. Iraq, where an Iraqi soldier was killed and an officer was wounded during a counter-terrorism raid in which 3 suspected Islamic State group fighters were also killed. This is an engagement with Baghdad's security forces. Apparently, there was a military operation in Kirkuk, north of the Iraqi capital, and they targeted 3 members of the terrorist group Daesh in the Turkestan region. So the suspected IS members were identified, approached, and a clash erupted, during which the jihadists were surrendered and killed, and the explosive belts they were wearing were detonated. So that's Turkestan area of Iraq for you.
Yes, I mean, Kirkuk is an area of Iraq which is borders on Kurdistan, the Kurdistani area,
Yes.
and it's a mixed population.
Yes.
And I think for that reason, the central government's hold and also the Kurdistan government's hold on the area is a bit weak, and that probably enables the IS to get a foothold. So it's interesting
Yes.
that that's going on.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Mm.
So
And of
have
course,
they changed? I
go ahead.
was going
Go
to
ahead.
ask,
Yeah.
have they changed it from ISIS to IS? What's going on there? You don't hear ISIS anymore. Is that because people put up a fuss that their kid's name ISIS was being used to signify terrorism or something?
That plus
Yeah,
ice
it
melts.
has.
Oh, no.
It has motivated. It has moved the terminology. I think ISIS has come about because the original group set up their own caliphate, didn't they? But then that was defeated, and that subsequently they have become known as the Islamic State, which is where the IS comes from. But also there's a sympathetic group that's called Daesh, these are different factions of the Muslim terrorist workers, militarized workers.
It does lend something to the old adage, there is no rest for the wicked.
And I think Al Qaeda are still in the wings as well, what I gather.
All right. Yeah.
Yes, they're in a different geographical area, aren't they? They're more up in the Afghanistan region, I believe.
Yeah, they're fighting the Taliban, but from the other side, as it were.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the Taliban are a bit soft for them, apparently.
Yes. No honor amongst thieves, eh? No. So leaving that hotbed and going to Iran, where of course there's long been rebellion over the killing originally of what's her name, Mahsa Amini, who was detained by the morality police a couple of years ago for not wearing her headscarf. And during her detention, he inexplicably died. You remember that?
Yeah.
And there was protests have been going on ever since, during which one young woman, I think at the time she was 17, called Nika, she was filmed at a protest in Tehran setting fire to her headscarf while standing on a dumpster. So she was very publicly performing this act. And there was video about it. And since then, she was mysteriously disappeared and died. And her mother, this is why it's news now, has been speaking in a BBC documentary and says that she can't forget for a second what happened to her daughter, Nika. And she was speaking to an actress, Zahra Amir Ebrahimi, who fled Iran back in 2008. So Nika died in the early stages of the protests in late 2022. And although the protests are continuing, they've become much less intense due to a bloody crackdown by the security forces. So anyway, her poor mother, she says, she's saying, Nika was concerned about the injustice and discrimination towards Iranians. She used to think about it a lot. She was extremely adventurous and fearless. I was always worried about how bold she was. I was afraid that something would happen to her. And she says that on that day when this dumpster hijab burning event happened, she called her on her phone, her mobile, and she could actually hear the protesters around her chanting, "Death to the dictator." So there you go. This has been rumbling on, and now her mother is coming on the media telling about it.
It's a shame when the thing you have to warn your kids to be is not too bold or too brave, and it says a lot about the state of the country when you would think you'd want stuff like that. You know, like we put certain attributes on a pedestal, and here we are telling the kids in certain places of the world, hey, remember, don't be too much of a leader, don't be too brave. Remember, don't stand out too much.
Don't stick your neck out too far.
Yeah.
So
she was 16. I think I said she was 17. She was actually 16, and the allegation is that she was beaten to death by security forces. So that's a terrible, tragic.
Now, if there's anything that Greta Thunberg should be on, is on that, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Actually, and that's I mean that. I don't mean to be flippant. You know, that's where the youth really should chime in a lot more loudly, because that is something that we can do something about if there's leadership behind it. You know, it's a lot tougher to, you know, you can stand in front of, you know, the WHO and tell them how ashamed they should be of themselves for the environment. But, you know, standing in front of people and saying, you know, women deserve their rights. That's much more important.
Well, in the immediate future, definitely, yes. I'm glad you mentioned Greta Thunberg, because we do go to Sweden now, and we stay with the Muslim theme too, because there was a Quran burning event, a protest that eventually it was permitted. This has been rumbling about since the beginning of the year, when the Quran was previously burned by an ex-Iraqi named of Salwan Momika, who fled to Sweden some time ago. And his intention, according to him, is to protest and express his opinion about the Quran. So now he's in Sweden. Back in, I think, January, he did his first public Quran burning. And there were protests, and initially the police were instructed to prevent such Quran burning protests. And they've had to think about it, and they've decided that it's not something they should inhibit. They say, this is the police, they say that the security risks were not of a nature to justify under current laws a decision to reject the request, because in Sweden you have to request to hold a protest, especially in this case as it's on the start of the 3-day Eid al-Adha Muslim holiday. So they got granted permission to hold this protest, and it passed off peacefully, because the man responsible tore pages from the Quran, wiped his shoes with some of them, and burned others, then placed a slice of bacon in the book. I'm trying to suppress. Yeah, I'm trying to suppress a snigger. I see you failed.
Yes.
Anyway, there's been repercussions from this. Let me go on and tell you what's happened elsewhere because of
no way.
yeah. So we now go to Iraq, where there's a Swedish embassy in Baghdad, and dozens of people stormed into this Swedish embassy protesting about the Quran being burnt in Stockholm.
I see. Yeah.
A crowd gathered outside the embassy after a powerful cleric called for an angry protest. So that was a repercussion. But since then, too, Turkey, which, as you know, is a majority Islamic country and is moving more towards hardline Islamism since Recep Tayyip Erdogan has gained control, and he was recently re-elected, a bit controversially, but he was. So the Turkey foreign minister also criticized the burning of the Quran outside a Stockholm mosque, and they say that I condemn the vile protest in Sweden against our holy book on the first day of the blessed Eid al-Adha. It's unacceptable to allow anti-Islam protests in the name of freedom of expression. What do you think of that?
And did he freely express that?
Who?
I mean, there is a lack of proportion here, because if somebody burns a Hindu scripture, an Old Testament Bible, a Christian Bible, the Jain scriptures, the Sikh scriptures, there may be a little bit of a reaction, but there's never quite the same reaction as this. Yeah. And what we want to see really is Muslims to understand that some people feel very strongly that their religion is not just false, but also dangerous and immoral, and they want to express that clearly and forcefully. I suspect that it's not probably productive, to be honest, burning Qurans, but I suspect there are ways in which one can get the message over, but I have my doubts about the productivity of that particular method.
Well, what they're asking for here is exemption from criticism. They're asking to stifle the freedom of speech, aren't they?
Yeah,
and
they're quite open about it. They're quite open about it. They don't want any criticism of Islam. They find it blasphemous, and of course we can't accept that.
Yes,
but I mean, we can criticize the religion in a much more sort of intellectual and sort of polite manner. I mean, go on.
So, Guy, recently in the last show, I brought up something that the Human Rights Tribunal made a claim about me as a Pastafarian. It says, "You're a Pastafarian member of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster who mocks religion and other certain religious practices and have denied me the right to consideration on the Human Rights Code for that."
All right.
It doesn't seem to be a matter of there is no matter of degrees. The blasphemy laws here in Canada were abrogated not until 1986, if you can believe it. But there were blasphemy laws, and while they've been abrogated on the law, on the court, there's still, within the institutions, this sort of belief that, despite the fact that we have freedom of religion and religious expression, that's really just on paper. It's not in practice. And so burning of Quran or the Christian Bible or the Pastafarian gospel, I think, maybe they do seem harsh to some people and some people wouldn't engage them. But I don't think that there's a matter of degrees, because the people who are offended by these things would be offended by anything. So if you stop,
I'm not sure about that, because there are people who criticize Islam in a more sort of polite, measured manner, who don't raise the same level of abuse.
But think about the Hebdo cartoons. They didn't burn any Qurans. They just put an image of the, or the satanic verses that Rushdie wrote. Like I say, it doesn't seem to be a matter of degrees. It's like they just take offense at anything and anyone and start putting up fatwas.
Well, my main takeaway is offense is free. It doesn't hurt anybody as long as it's not expressed violently. Like if I burn a book and then a pastor or a representation of that dogma's leadership, came and said, I condemn that action, and I'd like to host a peaceful, more or less, protest at the embassy of wherever that guy came from, and they all go there and they protest, and they're all very adamant that they didn't like the thing that I did. At the end of the day, that's communication, and that is acceptable, totally fine, and within the realm of consequences of the action that I performed. I think people should remember, like, people will get upset and they can condemn, people will get upset and they can protest, people can get upset and disagree, and they could do so in a way where it helps to facilitate this kind of conversation. I have no problem with that. I think that's the space for stuff like this. And I'd have no problem with people burning property that they legally obtained. So if he bought a copy of the Quran and he burned it, that's his property. That's the way how I see it as a secularist. And I have no problem with people getting upset with that if they can express it in a non-violent format, because burning a book doesn't hurt a person, and holding a protest doesn't hurt a person, and holding a grudge or being upset about it doesn't hurt people. We can still have a communication. So overall, this is news that I'm happy to see, because the alternative would be I decided to take my headgear off and then I get beaten by police until I die, and my mother has to be on TV to express it. That's the counter that we need to change. This is a good story. This is just someone did something that upset people, but they expressed it in a nonviolent fashion. So we all learned something.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I think it's quite polite, really, because the protester only tore off the pages of the Quran and used them to wipe his boots. Now, he could have used them to wipe.
Speaking of which, don't start me in my bidet. Don't start me in my bidet rant. But yeah.
But the thing is, this does have repercussions, because Sweden is applying to join NATO, and Turkey is frustrating that attempt on the basis that they permit these protests against Islam.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that Turkey won't be able to sustain that forever.
Right.
But, it's obviously annoying at the moment, because Finland is a bit stuck out on its own. I think its application has not been frustrated so long. I think that's gone through, hasn't it? I'm not sure.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
They haven't had any Quran burnings in Finland. Okay, moving on to Britain and Ireland. At 6 weeks old, Maria Cahill was transported in the form of a baby with her mother, Philomena, who was Irish. Yes, with her mother, Philomena, who was Irish, but had been living in London and had got pregnant in London and given birth in London. So the baby was a British citizen. The two of them, when the baby was 6 weeks old, was sent to one of Ireland's secretive mother and baby homes, which were regarded as places of punishment for sin. And this baby is now 69 years old, Maria Cahill. And she's upset. She's traumatized as a result. And she's writing poetry about it now. She says, "You are the blood in my veins, the water in my teardrops, but still I ache. You are so close, but yet I cannot touch you." That's about her mother, because they were separated, and she's lost her mother. She was raised in this home, a place of punishment for sin, where thousands of unmarried women and girls were being sent between 1930 and 1970, and their journeys were being organized by the state authorities and religious charities.
Of course.
And they were supposedly, you know something about the similar situation in Canada, don't you, Dred? They were supposedly voluntary repatriations, but we suspect that they were forced upon the young women by social pressure, because they were unwed, unmarried mothers. So this poor old woman now, Maria, 69, says, "I should never have been in Ireland." She's now living in Doncaster, South Yorkshire. "I should never have been in Ireland because I was born in London. I really wish that journey hadn't happened in my life." Isn't that sad?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there was a film about this as well, wasn't there?
Yes.
It's very famous.
Yeah. And it does really bring attention to the fact that, for all the bad stuff that happened here in Canada and came to the forefront with respect to the residential schools, the churches were far more broad in their application of these sorts of practices with, as you say, women and children born out of wedlock, and the cultural pressure to correct them, as you say. It wasn't limited to Indigenous peoples in any country. It was much more widespread and affected many more people of all cultures and all races, right? Yeah, no, it's an ongoing travesty.
It's all, and it's all inspired by religious taboos about how children should be born. I mean, it's ridiculous. These children are innocent. They have no control over the marital state of their mothers.
The hypocrisy is Jesus, right?
Yeah, he was an unmarried mother. Child of an unmarried mother.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's also, of course, the Catholic Church, is against abortion. And so, sure, the baby is born and then the baby is punished for being born. It's absolutely crazy. It's just irreconcilable. Nasty.
Okay, so I've got a piece of news which you might, on the face of it, consider to be good, because it's about the removal of the bishops from the House of Lords. Because anachronistically, we have a bishop's bench in the House of Lords where 24 bishops and 2 archbishops are given seats in our government, in our parliament. No, not in our government, in our parliament, I should say. And they're able to vote on legislation. And these are privileged positions. They're not elected. They are given by the leaders of the church, the established church, and the leader of the government at the time, and the monarch. And that's how it happens. We get these people that we don't want. They don't represent us. And they don't even represent the whole of the UK, because the Church of England doesn't extend into Scotland or Northern Ireland and dubiously into Wales. So the whole thing is crazy. But you'll be pleased to hear, it sounds a good idea, that there's going to be a debate. This has come about because of a campaign to disestablish the, I don't know if that's the right word, the bishops in the House of Lords. And the campaign involved a petition which achieved 164,000 signatures. And at that, they passed a threshold, which means that Parliament has to pay attention to them.
Right.
So what happens is the debate doesn't happen in the House of Commons. This is why it's not really the good news we might hope it would be. It's shelved off into the Westminster Hall, and there, more or less, people can say something that doesn't have any import on the legislation of the country. So it's going to happen on Thursday, in fact, and the Scottish National Party MP Tommy Shepherd applied for the debate. He got accepted, and he has called the presence of the church in Parliament incredibly unrepresentative of the population.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've got a figure to demonstrate that, don't you?
Indeed.
Yes.
We want to make as much fuss as possible about this.
Yeah. Well, so what's the number now? What was the number, John, of non-religious affiliated?
Oh, well, it depends what number you want to take.
It's about 53% or something now.
53, right? Yeah.
Something like that, isn't it?
It depends whether you go by the most recent census, which was 2021, or the most recent British Attitudes Survey, which was 2022, or a more recent international survey by I forget who, that they came out, I think, with the highest proportion of nuns at 51%. But anyway, the real figure is concerning those who actually attend Church of England churches, and that's about 1%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really, wow.
Yeah. But I mean, if you add in all the other churches and synagogues and gurdwaras and mosques, it comes to, I think, above 10%. But it's still a small figure, you know.
You know, I would bet you anything. They all eat pasta. So they're all
Yep.
Guilty.
I'm not sure if the Jains eat pasta. We'll have to ask them. I suspect they don't.
Make pasta that makes them happy. There has to
be. Well, that's going to happen anyway, and we think it might be the start of something. No,
is this like a private debate? So we won't hear it. We'll only hear the results.
There will be. I'm pretty sure there will be reporters there, but I don't know about. Because the NSS, the National Secular Society, will be present there, and they will. Yeah. I'm sure they will tell us what happened. But
it's been conducted in Westminster Hall, which is the oldest part of the Houses of Parliament, where they have these kind of debates. And I suppose they raise the profile of the issue, but that's just about it, really.
Yes. It's not where legislation is decided.
No, sadly. No. But anyway, I mean, the thing is firmly on the agenda. And you know, certainly the Labour Party talk about the abolition of the House of Lords and its replacement with something more democratic. But whether it'll all happen, you know, these discussions have been going on a very long time. I mean, if you think about the Channel Tunnel, the first proposals for a Channel Tunnel were something like 1810. You know, and it was finally built, you know, about 1980, was it 90? I can't remember now.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Don't hold your breath, basically. So to finish, you'll like this. A Polish man stripped naked and leapt onto the main altar of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. And written on his back, his naked back, was a message, "Save children of Ukraine." Now, this happened just at the end of the day as the basilica was closing, and it prompted Cardinal Mauro Gambetti to perform a penitential rite to atone for the desecration. Apparently the man was clad, he was clad apparently only in socks and sneakers. and this is only the part of a recent spate of such protests and disturbances in which activists have glued themselves to statues and a man has crashed into the Vatican gates. So things are happening in the Vatican.
John, you said that this was a story about a guy who ran naked somewhere, but then you followed it up with women wearing shoes and socks, and I feel cheated.
But you got to bear in mind, Ty, that the Vatican the St. Peter's is full of marble, which can be slippery. So I think it was right for him to wear those sneakers.
You know, he doesn't want to be too unreasonable.
Exactly.
Safety first.
Yes, indeed. Yes. We don't want our naked protesters to come to inadvertent harm.
No.
But I mean, there could have been so many other issues that he could have done that for. You know, that's I don't know. Why is it that the Vatican is the place to demonstrate that issue?
Because it's what gets you on global news. Anywhere else, no one would care. It wouldn't be here.
Yes, it's a media thing, isn't it? But isn't the Vatican a place where there's quite a lot of male statues with their bits elegantly carved in full view of the public?
Right.
So
I'm not sure if there are in St. Peter's, but there might be. There certainly are in the Vatican Museum.
So I am no marble sculpture artist, but I imagine that there would be some umbrage to have to even connotate a guy streaking with like high class marble art. Some guy's going to be like, they're not the same thing. How dare you? That's like calling banging on pots and lids the next AC/DC album. Like, come on, guy.
I mean, you know, a related theme is that you know, but my view of the crucifixion image, you know, with this full size, nearly naked body of Jesus dripping with blood and so forth. I think that's an obscene image of torture and execution, and it should not be shown, especially to vulnerable people and children.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a blood cult. It's a blood cult, right? By definition, you know.
Yeah. Well, I like to think what would have happened. I was going to say, I like to think what might have happened if, instead of being crucified, Jesus has been hanged, because that would mean that all the Christians would be wearing a little noose on the end of a chain around their neck.
Yeah. Or drawn and quartered, right?
Oh my gosh, what?
And it would have been as simple as 5 easy pieces, you know, or something like that. When you're trying to
on that picture. I'm going to bring this show to a close.
What? You're not going to talk about the Mormon crickets?
Yeah, talk about the Mormon crickets.
Oh,
yeah. I was looking forward to I've done some research.
Have you?
The Mormon cricket.
Yes, that was last week. In last week's news, what happened there was it was I think it was in Texas, northern Texas.
Nevada.
Was it? Yeah. Okay. Well, it was. What happened was some. They weren't actually biologically. They weren't classified as crickets, but they were similar, walking insects that eat plants, and a swarm of them eats all the plants. You know, they leave behind absolute desolation, and they were called Mormon crickets because in the early days of the Mormon, this is the Church of Latter-day Saints, colonization of Utah, their second harvest was decimated by a swarm of these katydids, I think they're called.
That's what they are, katydids.
They are like crickets, but not quite the same. And the story goes on because the Mormons were starving as a result of this loss of their second harvest. And there came a flock of seagulls who gobbled up all these offensive insects. So this has gone down
they call it the miracle of the gulls.
Yes, that's right. This has gone down in the tradition of the Mormon Church as their God saving them from future devastating swarms of crickets in their subsequent harvests.
Yeah.
And that's how they got the name of Mormon.
Yeah, but somebody pointed out it was quite funny. So the taxonomic name for them is Anabrus simplex, and they are members of the katydid family, not the cricket family. So they're quite distinct. But it was interesting that that these Mormon crickets are not crickets, or not real crickets, just like some people believe Mormons are not real Christians.
Well,
that's why I was looking forward to saying this as a part of the news item.
How apt is
no
that?
True Scotsman. No true Scotsman.
Yes. No, yeah. He takes water with his whiskey. What a terrible sin. So, guys, thank you very much. I'm going to play the outro now. I hope to see you again next week. We'll have some more fun.
Was the Pope appealing for peace, or was he praying for peace?
And the same applies to the carrying drag.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what do you have to say about that, guys?